Scott Walker said, how about just have an annual recertification vote? Let the workers say yes or no to continue to be recertified. They passed that into law over ferocious opposition in the state of Wisconsin, and you know what happened? In bargaining unit after bargaining unit, the people have voted not to recertify. In the third largest NEA unit in the state of Wisconsin, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, I ran into Raines Priebus, the chairman of the RNC in Kansas City when he came to our meeting there in September, and I said, did you know what happened in your hometown last week? And he didn't even know. The third largest NEA bargaining unit in the state voted by 70% to no longer be represented by the NEA. Why does the left fear this issue? Why were they attacking this press conference before it was held? Why are they attacking this movement before we really got started? Because they're scared of an honest, straight-up debate.
Amen.
The facts are good enough for our side of this argument. The facts are that those workers in Kenosha, Wisconsin had never had a choice. For decades, they had never had a choice. For the first time under Governor Walker's reforms, they had a choice. And look at the choice they made. That's the moral case at the heart of this cause. Now, my mind goes back to my boyhood and a visit by, I'm going to date myself, I was in the third or fourth grade, and President Johnson came to St. Louis, and he said in his boyhood, now that would be going back for more than 100 years, he said St. Louis was first in shoes and first in booze and last in the American League. Well, we outsourced our American League team 50 years ago to Baltimore, where they've done quite a bit better. The booze team got sold, it'll soon be 6 years, the booze company got sold, it'll soon be 6 years ago. And let's talk about shoes for a minute. St. Louis was the headquarters of all the shoe companies. And those of you from the western side of the state, I know this is not so much true, but in southeast Missouri, where I come from, and in most of the eastern side of the state, every little town had a shoe factory. It was either Brown Shoe Company or Interco, International Company out of St. Louis, or one of the big shoe companies had a shoe. Every town in the Boothie of any size at all had a shoe factory. And I see Bill Lant here, and I started my statewide tour speaking at the Joplin Rotary Club. And Bill, when I was finished, I didn't make this point, so I'm going to make it now because Bill coached me. Shoe factory employment was a mainstay. Now, in my adult life, all those shoe factory jobs are gone. 80% of shoe production in recent years have been in China, and now they're losing it to lower-cost producers, I guess Bangladesh and other Asian Pacific Rim countries. These are inexorable international economic forces that no one can stop. But here's the point. We ran a referendum on right to work, and it was defeated in 1978, 36 years ago this year. You know what the argument was on the shoe factory? If you pass right to work, we're going to lose all our shoe factory jobs. As those arguments were being made, economic forces were gathering steam that made that a moot point because they were leaving anywhere. Now, Missouri is wealthier today after those shoe factory jobs are gone. Our per capita income is higher than it was 36 years ago. But we're losing out to states that are moving ahead with this reform. When I was a boy, my brothers and I used to go visit our cousins in western Tennessee, and I used to look around in Huntington, Tennessee. Wow, this state is really backward. We're way ahead of them in Missouri, in my home state. You know what? That's no longer true. Tennessee has the auto jobs and the auto production jobs that used to be in St. Louis. Do you know what the stats are on UAW employment in the St. Louis market? The other thing about St. Louis that we learned in the fourth grade was it was number 2 in auto production to Detroit, right? The 2 big auto producing states were Missouri and Michigan. As recently as, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we had 4 plants of the big 3 in St. Louis. Chrysler had 2 plants. 3 of those are gone, and now we're left with 1 at Winston. Almost 8 out of 10 of UAW workers who had a job in St. Louis 10 years ago no longer have jobs. They're gone.
That's right.
They are not coming back. You know where those jobs are? There's a thriving American auto industry today. It's no longer in Detroit and St. Louis for the most part. It's in the swath of states from the Carolinas to Texas, and every single one of them is a right-to-work state. So it's not just the assembly plants, it's the auto parts plants that are clustering around Nashville. If you look at a map of the auto parts companies and the assembly plants, not one of those southern states, with one exception, there was one GM plant 30 years ago in Detroit, in Atlanta. But now they all have those plants that have migrated to the south. The question for us, as Lincoln said, is not just where we are now, but, as he put it, whether we are trending. Which way are we trending? Is St. Louis and Kansas City, are these cities trending more toward Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Atlanta, Boston, Phoenix, or are they more closely resembling the Clevelands, the Detroits, the Buffalo, New Yorks, and the old cities of decline? I say it's a reproach to us in Missouri when a heavily industrialized, heavily union state like Michigan is right to work and we are not. It's time for Missouri to move forward. My friends in the legislature in both the House and Senate, because I have gone to school over the last year on how they did this in Michigan and how they did this, it'll be 3 years ago next month, in Indiana. Both states are more heavily unionized. They're steel and auto states to a greater extent than Missouri is now or ever was. In Indiana, which did it first after Oklahoma did it in 2001. It was Oklahoma in 2001, in Indiana 3 years ago next month, and then in December of 2012, Michigan. But in Indiana, they've had an intervening election. Now, write this down for your folks in the legislature and some of our members who may be wavering. Not only did they not lose a single member in the November 2012 elections in Indiana who voted for this, but in the case of the House of Representatives in Indiana, they gained 2 seats. This is a vote that is a winner if people will stand up and make it, and make the moral case and defend it. You can be confident of that. So, Tim Bond used to say about the distinction between candidates and donors and contributors and volunteers, which we need. It's like breakfast. You know, the hen makes a contribution to the breakfast, but the hog makes a total commitment to the breakfast. We candidates are making a total commitment. I'm not on the ballot this year, but I'm out there. I'm all in for this cause. I'm available to come to your community as my schedule permits and speak to a service club. I'm available to stand on a podium like this or a platform like this with a union business agent or anyone from the other side and make the moral case for this needed reform to move our state forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Senator Ed Emery. And thank you very much, Senator.
Good morning, and thanks for being here. Thanks for being involved in Missouri and Missouri politics and Missouri policy. You know, probably the 2 most fundamental differences in our country that made us exceptional through the generations are individual liberty and economic freedom. And both of those are threatened in forced unionization. Now, I think we need to be as informed as we possibly can as we go into the highways and byways, as we go into the public square, and as we try to answer the questions of those who haven't yet decided to support right to work. Freedom to work is probably a better term. Amen. But we all know what right to work means. But talking about freedom of religion, because that's what it's about. It's about freedom. It's about both individual liberty and economic freedom. And there are differences. There are major differences between public unions and private sector unions. And I think we need to understand those. And there's lots of information out there. If you haven't ever looked at the differences, Franklin Roosevelt, and he's not the best known conservative, was adamantly opposed to public sector unions because of the threat that they posed and because of the vicious cycle that they begin to develop once you have a public sector union who preys them on the public without the public being involved in how that union is run, what its principles are, and what its purpose is. And so I think we need to differentiate that and recognize that, because just as has already been said, we're not here to say you cannot have unions, you should not have collective bargaining. I have no problem with collective bargaining. I have no problem with unions. I have a problem with forced unions, with government-imposed unions.
Amen.
With unions that are not mine because I chose to join them. Choices are what defines liberty.
That's right.
And we've taken those choices away when we force people to belong to a union in order to have a job. When government imposes itself into the worker-employer relationship, it's always going to end badly. And that's what we see. That's what we've seen in Missouri. That's what we've seen in other states that are forced union states. That's why we're seeing this increase in liberty and increase in employment, increase in manufacturing in states that have abandoned that forced unionist, forced dues type of arrangements. And so we need to get government out of that relationship between the employee and the employer. The other thing that forced unionization does is it completely inverts the value system, because now that employee's value is what the union gives them. It ought to be just the opposite. The union's value should be what the employee gives them. If the union has value, then employees will join that union, and they'll become a part of that union. This all started many years ago with guilds. Guilds were a great organization because they practiced exclusivism. In order to be a member of a guild, you had to demonstrate certain skills, certain character qualities. In order to maintain that relationship with that guild, you had to pursue those in your life vocation. Unions have grown out of that guild arrangement and become a political power rather than an employee improvement process. And I think that right now we're seeing the movement that Peter described, because we're seeing movement away from states with less liberty into states with more liberty, more freedom, more individual liberty, more economic freedom. We have to make that message clear. People understand individual liberty and economic freedom once it's described. They have to understand the threat that forced unionization is. They have to understand the difference between opposing forced unionization and opposing unions and opposing workers, and they have to understand the facts, as Eric has shared so many of. One of the things that will be advocated by the unions is, look at all these right-to-work states, the average wages all go down. Well, sure they go down. You have a whole lot more people working in those states, and they aren't necessarily working for $25 an hour. They couldn't get a job at $25 an hour, but they can at 20, because they're worth 20, or they're worth 17, or they're worth 12. And so all of a sudden you have a whole lot more people working, but you won't find in any of those states that those workers who were employed, unionized, that their wages have gone down. You'll find that there are just more people working because there's more freedom, the employer has more freedom, and the workers have more freedom. As we go forward in Missouri with promoting freedom to work, we need to make sure that people understand the difference between liberty and oppression.
Amen.
Because unions represent that.
Okay, our last speaker is Speaker of the House, Tim Jones. Tim has been extremely bold in his beliefs about right to work, and it is just wonderful to have a Speaker of the House do that. Tim Jones.
Well, good morning, everyone.
want to thank you for making the trip up here today. I want to thank my colleagues for speaking before me. Representative Burlison gave you the facts on this issue. Governor Peter Kinder gave us the history lesson as to why we need to have this debate. Senator Emery gave us the philosophy and what it truly is about. There are talking points against having the debate on this issue, but Senator Emery boiled it down to what it truly is. Why, in 2014, should workers not have the freedom of choice? I want to thank all my colleagues from the House and Senate for being here today. Those of you who are not familiar with all the faces in the House and Senate, I look around, many of my House colleagues, many of my Senate colleagues are here in this room today. Together, they collectively represent hundreds of thousands of Missourians who want this debate, want this positive economic policy to be put into place. At the risk of not singling one of them out over another, I do want to mention one person who is here. Representative Holly Rader had the courage and the foresight last year to create the Worker Freedom Caucus. Nearly 50 members of the House boldly put their name on the dotted line and said, "It is time to give workers." This doesn't come from me. This doesn't just come from Representative Rader. This doesn't come from some magical, amorphous special interest group outside the state of Missouri. I am being told and being asked to have this debate for over 7 years now from Missourians. Right. Who are these Missourians? I'll tell you who they are. I've traveled the state extensively. I took it upon my shoulders as my responsibility as one of the leaders in the General Assembly to go out into your districts. And as I look around, I've been in, I think, just about every single one of your hometowns. Well over 50, approaching 60 counties that I've been to, spoken with you, spoken to the job creators in your district, spoken to the people who have put everything they've owned on the line to start a business, to set up a factory, to set up a little shop, to make something. I've been in little companies in Marshfield, Missouri that make labels. I've been down in southeast Missouri where we have the largest nail manufacturer in the country. I've been from coast to coast, from top to bottom, all over. And what I've heard is, give us the option. I've heard it from rank and file workers too, who will tell you privately on the side, I am tired of my hard-earned dollars going for political purposes with which I do not agree. I want freedom. All those small business owners, all those manufacturers, especially the ones along our borders, who look across to the neighboring states around us and see Missouri continue to have a jobs drain that gets bigger and bigger and larger every single year. I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of you, the non-electeds, the true public servants, who have taken time away from your families, your own jobs, your own daily chores of taking care of your children and your employees, for making the trip to Jefferson City to stand in support of worker freedom. You know, as we look around the national landscape, we see a group of states who have experienced solid economic growth and job creation, while so many others have seen their economies headed in the opposite direction. We stand at a generational choice here and a crossroads. 24 states are now worker freedom states. That's half the country. We can make it to solid 50% by becoming the 25th. You know what that says to me? This is no longer an experiment. This is no longer an anomaly. This is no longer some political partisan talking point. This is good economic theory being put into practice. We can look to the Rust Belt, to the north generally and to the east, and look at states that are still trying to get by on old-fashioned, cumbersome tax and spend policies of yesteryear. What have those states seen? They've seen massive population exodus, massive job loss. You want to talk about loss of wages, they've seen that as well. If Detroit and Michigan if Detroit and Michigan, who were strongholds of union influence, the epicenter of union control, if being a closed-shop union, non-worker freedom state was so successful, Detroit would not be going through the bankruptcy court.
That's right.
As we sit here
That's
today.
right.
If being a closed union shop, non-worker freedom state was so good for economic growth and workers and wages, Ford would not have left Hazelwood, Missouri. We wouldn't have a 300-acre parking lot in Fenton, Missouri, where the Chrysler plant once stood, which is now a barren wasteland. And we wouldn't be hanging on to our small job manufacturers by the very skin of our teeth every day. So we can be here in the middle of the country. We can look to those states and we can see their failures. This year, one of our major national moving chains, United Van Lines, put out a study that showed where the job movement is in this country. It is departing the north and the eastern states that are high tax, forced union states, and guess where the population and the jobs are flowing to? The South and the West, which have lowered their tax burdens and said, workers, you can have freedom here. Please come. A story came out today. A story came out just today, hit the national wires. Guess what Texas is leading the country in? Job growth, population increases, and guess what? Rising wages. They can do it, so can we. So the good news is, proof is evident. Numbers do not lie when it comes to economic benefits of pro-worker freedom policies. Studies have shown that these states create more private sector jobs, enjoy lower poverty rates, experience more development in the field of technology, realize more income growth, as I mentioned, increase the number of people covered by employment-based private health insurance. Folks, socializing our healthcare system is a failure, and continuing to have socialized economic policies is a failure as well. People want economic freedom and liberty. I think it's equally important that the people in Missouri, this is where you all come in, when you go back home and talk to, in your coffee shops, to your small business owners, those who don't have the time or the ability to travel here today. They need to understand that the worker freedom and choice movement is a movement that is entirely pro-worker. It's pro-jobs. It's pro-growth. I know the unions, the big labor bosses, the ones who truly only ultimately benefit by being a closed union shop state, continue to portray this as anti-worker. But we know it's anything but the truth. Let's talk about Boeing for a second. Why did Boeing stay in Washington? Because of tax policy and labor policy. What changed there? The state gave them a massive multi-billion-dollar tax cut and only decided to keep those jobs there when the unions acquiesced to major concessions so Boeing could continue to operate. That's the free market at work, and that's why the Boeing contract will stay there. Governor Nixon proved that first point this past special session. Governor Nixon proved that when you give states a massive reduction in taxes, they will bring jobs and economic growth to your state as well. So he's admitted the first point. I'll be happy to lead the charge with Governor Nixon this year in reducing taxes for all Missourians. The second point is going to get him a little bit harder to admit, because Governor Nixon's top financial donors, his top backers, to the tune of millions of dollars a year, something that goes largely unreported. If you want to talk about where we need to have campaign finance reform, let's look at the millions of dollars that the union bosses have lined Governor Nixon's coffers with. It's time for the workers to have a voice.
Hey.
Second point about Boeing. When they chose to have their first national expansion into another state in recent years, their first major national expansion into another state besides the states they currently operate, where did they go? South Carolina, a low-tax, worker freedom state. And they're enjoying the fruits of those labors with an annual economic impact to that region of more than $4.6 billion a year. Wouldn't we love to have some of that worker freedom and that economic growth here in Missouri?
Absolutely.
As my colleague Speaker Harold Ayer said at the time, when Boeing made that major announcement to create thousands of high-paying jobs and bring billions of dollars in economic growth to South Carolina, the Speaker said, and I couldn't agree with him more, as a legislature, it's our job to create an environment that fosters economic growth so the private sector can do what government cannot, create sustainable new jobs. Thomas Jefferson said, "To compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical." Why? Why in this day and age do the workers of Missouri not have economic freedom and liberty to make that choice for themselves? Why are the folks on the other side of this argument so afraid of giving workers this freedom of choice? Because they'll lose control and they'll lose power. It's time to take power out of the hands of the big labor bosses and put it back in the hands of Missouri workers.
Amen.
Freedom to work increases job opportunities for the unemployed. We have plenty of those these days. And expands workers' choices about how they spend their own hard-earned money. The studies show and are proven that states that have these laws enjoy greater economic growth and a higher standard of living. According to the National Institute for Labor Relations Research, for the last decade, employment in worker freedom states grew by nearly 3%, while employment in union-run states fell by over 3.5%. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the population movement across this country. People are speaking with the dollars in their pockets and with their feet, and they're choosing to go to states that have the best policies. It's time to remind Missourians that labor unions are no longer about representing the interests of the worker, but instead they have become one of the largest political forces in the country, spending millions and millions of dollars to protect their own self-interests. Political forces that exclusively support ideologies which do not represent the common sense of Missouri. The cold, hard truth is labor unions are more about politics now and not about good policy. I want this debate this year to center on policy, to center on what's best for the future generations of Missourians. It's imperative we have this debate now to remind Missourians of this very important fact. It's important now more than ever, as our state struggles near the bottom at 47th in GDP growth, to do something transformational. The status quo of remaining a closed union shop state has not helped us. As I mentioned, workers are leaving our state in thousands. Businesses are leaving our state in droves. We are nearly surrounded by states that say, come to us, where freedom and liberty reign. We can give our workers the competitive edge. We can put Missouri back on track to become a job producer and a grower, a manufacturer, a creator. We just need to unleash that freedom and liberty and make Missouri the 25th state for worker freedom and choice.
Amen.
Have made a move, although many have tried. This room is full, but there are so many people that could not make it here that would be here for whatever reason. And I just hope that you will be as for it as me and understand that we are losing our country because union bosses are the ones that got Obama over the finish line. Because it's about the money. And we're going nowhere because of it. And so I just want to thank you for coming so much. And I want to tell you that also at noon we have speakers Executive Director Shane Scholler is going to be speaking on voter ID, and election integrity down in hearing room 7. We're going to have Senator John Lamping down there speaking about his Obamacare bill. And we're going to have, Stacey Shore speaking on Common Core. And that's in hearing room 7 starting at noon. Also at 2 o'clock, Ike Skelton asked me to tell you that he is got an Agenda 21 thing going on in hearing room 2. So hearing room 7, noon, hope to see you. People that came here and your legislator doesn't know you for right to work, will you please go find them and let them know, because that's the only thing Jefferson City understands, is seeing people